Hey everyone, and welcome to Just In My Opinion. Today I'm looking at Warlander, and to describe the game, I'm literally going to read the game's description. Also, before that, I'm going to get the whole I received a review copy of this game from the developers thing out of the way, so yeah, I got this for free. Wreak your path of vengeance in a procedurally generated dark fantasy world with a unique take on stamina-based combat. Battle in arenas with interactive environment where every run will be one of a kind. Experience a variety of abilities and power-ups along with permadeath. Slice, die, repeat. That sounds pretty cool, and honestly, when I looked at the trailer for the game, it looked incredible. Here's the thing, there are moments that are incredible, but overall the game feels a little unpolished and perhaps not the best candidate for a release version of a game. But let's step back. What makes Warlander unique? That has to be the combat. The entire game is based around dismembering your enemies with your sentient sword. Severed limbs are used as currency for purchasing upgrades, which is honestly a really cool concept. Some upgrades require legs or arms or heads, and to get the pieces you need, you have to consciously think about how you're killing your enemies. If you need some extra legs to get what you want, you'll have to go out of your way to slice the legs off of your enemies. Mildly gruesome, but conceptually cool. It actually changed how I approach combat in some situations. Speaking of slicing legs off your enemies, when enemies are stuck on the ground, you can perform a finishing move to put them out of their misery. Alright, sounds great so far. Unfortunately, this is where things start to fall apart. Finishing moves were the first time I noticed that something was kind of off with the animations. Finishing enemies off was clunky, and as far as I'm concerned, it basically just looked like the character was hovering over top of the enemies and then they were dead. In fact, the lack of polish is sort of a constant problem, except it's in the strangest places. Generally, when a game lacks polish, you'll notice it in the trivial tasks or actions. In Warlander, it's sort of the opposite. Combat with generic enemies always felt smooth and fluid with me, outside of finishing moves. Then, when you fight bosses, it felt like they weren't quite complete. While the bosses felt somewhat unique and cool, quite a few of them felt more like training dummies than bosses. Which is funny, because when you get to the end of the map and fight the final boss, you'll quickly realize that while all the earlier bosses were undertuned, the final boss is so grossly overtuned that you could sometimes just get one shot by an attack whose indicator actually just didn't show up on the ground. Now, I don't have issues with one-shot mechanics in general, but when the final boss can one-shot you, and when dying means literally starting a 30 to 60 minute run over again from the start, it's kind of frustrating. So, Warlander is at its best when you're partaking in good old-fashioned combat with regular old enemies. There's also a lot of enemy diversity as you progress, though the enemies available at the onset are a little lacking. Regardless, chopping through swarms of enemies is incredibly satisfying, and dare I say, addicting? Oh, sorry, one more thing. The game said every run is one of a kind and that things are procedurally generated. No. Every run felt the same. Sure, there is some diversity in the tree you choose to build, or the incredibly minor upgrades you receive, but how the run feels is completely in the player's control. So each run typically turns into whatever you're most comfortable with. Procedurally generated is also a stretch. The overall map of nodes is different, and there are probably a set of rules that define how it's generated. So yeah, I guess technically. However, the actual arenas you fight in are not random, and the game pulls them from a predefined set of arenas based on how deep into the map you are. It's not like Diablo, where the map and locations of things are different every time you load an area up. Nothing felt roguelike to me. Nothing felt random, and that was kind of disappointing. One more thing, just the one, I promise. The controls in this game initially felt extremely clunky. For a long time, I thought I was dying because of bad controls. This isn't exactly the case. Your character is slow, that's true. The windows to dodge are narrow, but once you play the game for a while, combat stops feeling clunky. Trust me. How can I say that truly though? Well, for a while I was having trouble consistently pushing through the game. Eventually I got to the point where every single run made it to the end of the game. Period. Alright, that was probably a lot to take in. Where does that leave us? Well, Warlanders is interesting. I can't deny the fact that I found combat and the core of the game incredibly addicting. At the same time, whenever I was enjoying combat and feeling addicted to the game in general, it was impossible to not notice all of the problems surrounding the core game. Honestly, playing this game made me feel dirty. I couldn't put it down, but I also felt ashamed that I was enjoying something that felt so incredibly unfinished. Should you pick it up? I think this game could be great down the road. I think it's a question of whether or not the developers take a step back and try to clean up the game. The bones of this game are solid, but that's about it. And don't forget, this is just my opinion. If you feel like I left something out, disagree, or just want to suggest something else for me to look at, leave a comment. If you enjoyed this video, think about liking and subscribing. It helps the channel grow and it helps me ensure that I'm reviewing games that everyone cares about. Otherwise, thanks for watching. There's new videos every couple of weeks, and yeah, end of the rant.